Some nights the world feels wider than it should. Stars breathe slower, time folds in on itself, and you're left with just the quiet hum of your own thoughts. Maybe that's when you notice it, the way certain smells make your shoulders drop, or how a warm cup held between your palms feels like a small conversation with calm. Gardens remember things we've forgotten. The way lavender closes its petals when dusk arrives. How chamomile folds inward as shadows lengthen. These aren't accidents. They're rhythms older than clocks, quieter than alarms, softer than any pill bottle ever promised. Before we begin, if you find peace in these quiet journeys, you might like to stay a while. You can gently tap the like button, subscribe if you'd like more stories told softly, and ring the little bell, not for noise, but so the next quiet night can find you again. No pressure, only when it feels right. Now, let's drift. Tonight we're walking through gardens that science finally understood. Not the kind with signs and tour guides, but the ones your grandmother might have kept. Small plots where time crept between stones and mint grew wild by the back door. She didn't call them medicine, she just knew. You don't need to understand everything that happens in your brain when you smell lavender. You don't need a chemistry degree to know that chamomile tea tastes like being held. But maybe knowing why these things work makes the comfort feel less like magic and more like trust. Because that's what this is, trust. Between you and the earth, between your nervous system and a handful of dried flowers, between insomnia and something that's been growing in soil for 10,000 summers, waiting patiently to whisper rest. The ancient Egyptians knew. They pressed lavender into oils for their temples, not because someone published a study, but because the priests noticed something. When lavender burned in the evening air, the worshippers grew quiet, not sedated, just softer, like their edges had been rounded by something invisible. Romans carried small sachets of dried lavender on long marches, soldiers miles from home, tucking purple flowers into their armor. Historians thought it was for wounds. It was, but not the kind that bled. The kind that kept you awake at night staring at unfamiliar stars, wondering if you'd ever sleep deeply again. The word lavender comes from the Latin lavare, to wash. Not just the body, but something deeper, something that soap can't reach. Medieval monks planted chamomile between the rows of their monastery gardens. They called it the plant physician because it seemed to heal other plants growing nearby. What they didn't know, what they couldn't have known, was that chamomile contains a compound called apigenin, a small molecule that fits into receptors in your brain like a key sliding into a very old lock. Your brain has these receptors waiting, GABA A receptors. They're there all the time, little doorways that, when open, tell your nervous system it's safe now. You can stop guarding, you can let go. Apigenin doesn't force those doors open. It just knocks very gently, like someone whispering through a screen door on a summer night. And your brain, if it's ready, opens. Modern research tried to measure this. Scientists at the University of Michigan gave chamomile extract to elderly patients for 28 days. They didn't promise anything. They just measured. Sleep quality scores improved by 42%. Not a little, a lot. Enough that people stopped setting 3 alarms. Enough that mornings felt less like battle. But here's the thing, the studies don't capture. Chamomile doesn't feel like medicine. It feels like sitting at a kitchen table with someone who loves you. It tastes like honey and patience, like time moving slower on purpose. You brew it by pouring hot water, not boiling just hot over dried flowers. You wait 5 minutes, some people wait 10. It's not about precision, it's about the ritual, the pause, the moment where you stop scrolling, stop planning, stop rehearsing tomorrow's conversations, and you just hold something warm and wait for it to teach you how to be calm again. Native American tribes knew about passion flower before anyone called it that. The Algonquin used it for sleeplessness, crushing the leaves into a paste and mixing it with water. They didn't have peer-reviewed journals. They had observation. They had patience. They had centuries of watching what worked and what didn't. When Spanish missionaries arrived in the 1500s, they saw the flower structure petals arranged like a crown's stamens, like nails, and named it after the Passion of Christ. They missed the point entirely. This wasn't about suffering. This was about relief. Passion flower increases something in your brain called GABA. Not dramatically, not like a switch flipping, more like a gradual dimming of lights in a room where you've been squinting for hours. Your thoughts don't stop. They just stop shouting. In 2011, researchers in Australia gave passion flower tea to adults struggling with sleep. Not every night, just 7 nights. Sleep diaries showed an extra 26 minutes of rest. That might not sound like much until you've spent 3 a.m. staring at ceiling cracks, counting those minutes like currency. But the real change wasn't duration. It was quality. People wrote things like, woke up less, dreams felt softer, didn't fight it anymore. That last one matters. Didn't fight it. Because sometimes the problem isn't that sleep won't come. It's that we've been at war with it for so long we forgot how to surrender. Valerian root smells terrible. Let's just say that. It smells like wet earth old gym socks and something faintly medicinal. If you open a bottle of valerian extract, you'll understand why people in the Middle Ages called it heal-all, but also why they kept it far from the dinner table. Hippocrates wrote about valerian in 400 BCE. He didn't describe the smell. He described the effect, calming to the troubled mind. Which is ancient Greek for, this stuff works, but wow, the scent. The root contains valerianic acid, a compound that does something clever. It doesn't make you drowsy. It makes your brain better at using the GABA you already have. Think of it like turning up the volume on a whisper instead of adding more sound. During World War II, when London was under air raids and nobody could sleep because of sirens and bombs and the weight of not knowing if morning would come, British doctors prescribed valerian tincture, not as a cure, as a kindness, as a way to say your fear is real, but maybe for a few hours your body can pretend it's safe. Modern meta-analysis, those big studies that look at dozens of other studies, found that valerian improved sleep quality in 80% of trials. 80%. That's not every person, not every night, but it's enough to matter. Enough that scientists keep studying it, even though it's been used for 2,000 years. You take valerian about an hour before bed. Some people need more, some people need less. It's not a race. It's a conversation between your brain and a root that's been growing in soil, storing up something your neurons happen to need. The thing about herbal remedies is they don't work like light switches. They work like sunsets, gradual, gentle. You don't notice the exact moment the sky stops being blue and starts being purple. You just look up eventually and realize, oh, it's night now. That's how chamomile feels, how lavender smells, how valerian tastes terrible at first. But then your body remembers something. Not a memory you can name. A memory older than language. The kind that lives in your nervous system and the parts of you that don't need explanations, only permission. So, tonight if you can't sleep, maybe don't fight it. Maybe just hold something warm. Maybe just breathe in something that smells like a garden you've never visited but somehow recognize. The plants don't judge. They've been waiting. Quiet, patient, growing in the dark, just like you. There's a color that exists only at dusk. Not quite purple, not quite blue. The kind you see in the sky right before dark commits fully. Lavender lives in that space too, the in-between, the threshold, the place where day hasn't left, but night has already arrived to wait patiently by the door. Lavandula angustifolia. That's the scientific name, but nobody calls it that. They call it the plant that smells like memory, like your grandmother's closet, like the drawer where you keep letters you'll never send. It grows wild across Mediterranean hillsides, turning entire mountains purple every June, and the air there smells like forgetting and remembering at the same time. Romans didn't just admire it, they needed it. Soldiers marching across Europe carried small pouches tied to their belts, not for decoration, for survival. When you're sleeping on foreign ground with one eye open, listening for footsteps or worse, lavender becomes medicine. Not the kind that heals wounds you can see, the kind that makes your heartbeat slow down enough to let exhaustion win. The word comes from lavara, to wash. But here's what they meant: washing away the parts of the day that cling to you, the conversations that loop, the decisions that won't settle, the low hum of worry that feels like tinnitus of the soul. Lavender washes that, not with water, with something quieter. Inside those purple spikes lives a molecule called linalool. It makes up 25 to 38% of lavender essential oil, depending on where it grows and how much sun it gets. Linalool is small, simple, just 10 carbon atoms arranged in a way that happens to fit perfectly into receptors in your olfactory system, the part of your brain that processes smell. But here's where it gets interesting. Your olfactory bulb connects directly to the amygdala and hippocampus. No filter, no intermediary. Smell goes straight to the parts of your brain that handle emotion and memory. That's why certain scents can pull you back to childhood in half a second. That's why lavender doesn't just smell nice, it feels like something. In 2013, a researcher named Coulavand published a study that measured what happens when you breathe in linalool. Not sniff aggressively, just breathe normally in a room where lavender oil is diffusing. Cortisol levels, that's your primary stress hormone, dropped by 16% within 30 minutes. 16%. Without a pill, without a doctor, just air that smells like purple flowers. But the real shift happened in the autonomic nervous system. That's the part of you that runs on autopilot. Heart rate, blood pressure, breathing depth. The things you don't think about until suddenly you're thinking about them at 3 a.m. because your heart is racing and you don't know why. Linalool activates the parasympathetic branch, the rest and digest side, the part that says it's okay now. You can stop running. Japan takes sleep research seriously. In 2012, scientists at Kagoshima University ran a study on people with chronic insomnia, not occasional bad nights, chronic. The kind where you stop hoping for 8 hours and start negotiating for 4. They gave half the group lavender aromatherapy before bed. Nothing fancy, just a diffuser running quietly in the corner. The other half got a placebo scent, something neutral that smelled like nothing important. They measured brain activity with polysomnography, those sticky electrodes that map your sleep stages in real time. The lavender group spent 20% more time in slow-wave sleep. That's the deep kind, the restorative kind, the kind where your brain finally stops narrating your life and just lets your body repair itself. 20% sounds small until you do the math. If you sleep 7 hours, that's an extra 84 minutes of deep sleep per night. Almost an hour and a half more of the sleep that actually matters. The kind you wake up from feeling like a different person. And the participants reported something the machines couldn't measure. They said sleep felt easier, not forced, not fought for, just easier. Like their bodies remembered how to do something they'd been performing wrong for years. You can buy lavender oil anywhere now. Grocery stores, gas stations, little bottles with handwritten labels at farmers markets. But not all lavender is the same. Lavandula angustifolia. True lavender has the highest linalool content. Lavandin, the hybrid version, smells sharper, stronger. It's fine for cleaning products, but harsh for sleep. You want the gentle one, the one that smells like softness, not loudness. 2 to 4 drops on your pillowcase, that's all. Not 10, not a whole dropper. Your olfactory system is sensitive. You're not trying to overpower your senses. You're trying to remind them of something they already know. Or you can make tea. 1 tablespoon of dried lavender buds in a cup of hot water. Steep for 5 to 10 minutes. It tastes floral and slightly bitter, like drinking a garden. Some people add honey, some people don't. Depends if you want sweetness or if you want to sit with the bitterness for a minute and see what it teaches you. Medieval herbalists didn't know about linalool or parasympathetic activation. They just knew that when you planted lavender near the bedroom window, people slept better. They called it the herb of love, but not because of romance, because it made people kinder, softer, less likely to pick fights over nothing. And maybe that's love too, choosing calm when anger would be easier. In Victorian England, women kept lavender sachets in their glove drawers and under their mattresses. Propriety demanded they stay composed, poised unruffled by the chaos of industrial revolution happening outside their parlor windows. Lavender helped, not because it sedated them, but because it gave their nervous systems permission to stop performing. There's a farm in Provence where lavender has been growing for 400 years. Same soil, same families tending it. Tourists come to take photos of the purple rose stretching toward mountains, but the farmers don't care about that. They care about timing. You harvest lavender right before the flowers fully open. That's when the oil concentration peaks. Too early, and you lose potency. Too late, and the fragrance fades. They cut the stems by hand at dawn while dew is forming, but the sun hasn't burned it off yet. The whole field smells like calm made visible. Workers say they sleep better during harvest season, even though they're exhausted, even though they're waking up at 4 a.m. to beat the heat. Something about being surrounded by that much lavender rewires your baseline for stress. Modern research keeps trying to isolate this active ingredient. They want to extract linalool, synthesize it, put it in a pill. But here's what they keep finding. Synthetic linalool doesn't work as well. Lavender oil contains over 100 compounds. Linalool is the star, but it's not performing solo. There's linalool acetate camphor, terpenen, 4-OL, dozens of other molecules working in concert. The whole is greater than the parts. That's true for most plants. We keep trying to reduce them to single chemicals, but they resist reduction. They're symphonies, not solos. You can't pull out the violin section and expect the same effect. Athletes use lavender now, not just yogis and people who burn incense. Professional athletes, the kind who treat their bodies like machines and their sleep like fuel. Studies show lavender reduces muscle tension, lowers inflammation, markers speeds, recovery time. Not by a lot, just enough. Just enough that when margins matter, when a tenth of a second decides between gold and silver, lavender becomes part of the protocol. But you don't need to be an athlete. You don't need to optimize anything. You just need to be a person who's tired of being tired. A person who wants to stop fighting their own nervous system every night. A person who's willing to try something that's been working for 2,000 years and still doesn't fully fit into our neat little boxes labeled proven or placebo. Because maybe it's both. Maybe the scent does something to your neurons and also something to your sense of ritual. Maybe lighting a candle, adding drops to a diffuser, breathing in something that smells like peace, maybe that's part of the medicine too. The slowness, the intention, the moment where you stop doom scrolling and start doing something gentle for yourself. Lavender doesn't knock you out. It doesn't drag you into unconsciousness. It just whispers to your nervous system in a language older than words. It says, you don't have to guard anymore. You can rest, not forever, just tonight, just for now. And sometimes just for now is all you need. Some plants look like they were designed by someone who understood loneliness. Small white petals around a yellow center growing low to the ground, easy to overlook unless you're paying attention. Chamomile doesn't demand anything. It just exists quietly in fields and gardens, waiting for someone to notice it smells like kindness. Matricaria chamomilla, German chamomile, the kind that's been brewed into tea for so long that nobody remembers who did it first. Egyptians left dried chamomile in tombs, not as decoration but as provision, something the dead might need on their journey. The Greeks called it ground apple because when you crush the flowers, they smell faintly sweet like fruit that never quite ripened. But it's the science inside those unassuming petals that makes your grandmother's instinct to brew chamomile tea before bed less folklore and more biochemistry that just hadn't been named yet. There's a compound called apigenin. It's a flavonoid, which sounds technical until you realize flavonoids are just what plants produce to protect themselves from UV radiation and pests. Apigenin is chamomile's quiet bodyguard, but when you drink it, that bodyguard starts working for you instead. Your brain has receptor sites called GABA A receptors. GABA stands for gamma-aminobutyric acid, which is a mouthful, but all you need to know is this GABA is your brain's primary inhibitory neurotransmitter. That means it slows things down. It tells the neural networks that are firing too fast, too loud, too much ease up. Take a breath. You don't need to solve everything right now. Apigenin binds to these GABA A receptors, not aggressively. Not like benzodiazepines, which basically kick the door open and force your neurons into submission. Apigenin knocks politely. It slides into the receptor site like a key that was cut specifically for that lock. And when it does, your neurons start producing a different frequency. Calmer, quieter, like someone turned down the volume on a radio that's been blaring static for hours. In 2017, researchers named Adib Hajbagheri and Musavi ran a study at Kashan University of Medical Sciences in Iran. They worked with elderly patients in nursing homes, people whose sleep had been fractured for years. Medications, pain, the strange acoustics of institutional hallways, all of it, compounding into nights that felt longer than days. They gave half the group chamomile extract, 400 milligrams twice a day for 28 days. The other half got a placebo. Nobody knew which was which. Standard protocol. At the end of the month, they measured sleep quality using the Pittsburgh Sleep Quality Index, which asks questions like, how long does it take you to fall asleep? How many times do you wake up? How rested do you feel in the morning? The chamomile group scores improved by 42%. 42. That's not a subtle shift. That's the difference between lying awake rehearsing regrets and actually sleeping. Between waking up 5 times a night and waking up once. Between feeling like morning is a punishment and feeling like it's just the start of another day. But here's what the numbers don't capture. The participants said sleep felt different, not heavier, lighter. Like they stopped fighting it. Like their bodies remembered they were allowed to rest. Another study, this one in 2015 by a researcher named Amsterdam, focused on people with generalized anxiety disorder, the kind where your baseline for worry is so high that even good news gets filtered through a lens of what could go wrong. They use chamomile extract standardized to 1.2% apigenin. After 8 weeks, nighttime awakenings dropped by 34%. Not because chamomile sedates you, because it changes the conversation your brain is having with itself. It lowers the volume on the part that keeps asking, what if? What if something bad happens? What if I'm not ready? What if I forget something important? Chamomile doesn't answer those questions. It just makes them less urgent. Egyptian medical papyri from 1550 BCE list chamomile as a remedy for calming the heart. They didn't have EKGs, they didn't know about heart rate variability or vagal tone, but they noticed that people who drank chamomile seemed less agitated. Their hands stopped trembling, their breathing slowed. Whatever was tightening in their chest loosened just a little. Medieval monks grew chamomile in monastery gardens because they believed it helped other plants stay healthy. They weren't wrong. Chamomile releases compounds into the soil that deter certain pests and fungi. It's a good neighbor, the kind that doesn't ask for much, but makes everything around it better just by being there. Maybe that's why it works on people too. We're not so different from gardens. We respond to things that make us feel safer, without demanding we explain why we were scared in the first place. You brew chamomile by steeping dried flowers in water that's hot but not boiling. Boiling water destroys some of the volatile oils, the delicate compounds that carry the scent, and a portion of the therapeutic effect. You want water around 200 degrees Fahrenheit, just off the boil. Pour it over a tablespoon of dried flowers or 2 teaspoons of fresh ones, if you're lucky enough to grow your own. Wait 5 minutes, some people wait 10. The longer you steep, the stronger the flavor, but also the more bitter. Chamomile has a compound called matrichin that converts to chamazoline when exposed to heat. Chamazoline is anti-inflammatory, which is why chamomile tea helps sore throats and upset stomachs. But it's also bitter, so you're balancing benefit with taste. Most people add honey, not just for sweetness, but because honey itself has tryptophan, a precursor to serotonin, which converts to melatonin in darkness. So you're layering compounds. Apigenin plus tryptophan plus the ritual of holding something warm. It's cumulative. Each element doing a small thing, and together they do something larger. There's a reason chamomile tea is what people reach for when they're sad. Not clinically depressed, but that low-grade sadness that comes from being human. The kind that arrives on random Tuesdays for no reason and sits with you like an uninvited guest. Chamomile doesn't fix that, but it makes the sitting more bearable. In Germany, chamomile is called alles zutraut, which means capable of anything. It's used for inflammation, digestive issues, skin conditions, anxiety, and yes, sleep. It's the Swiss Army knife of herbs. Not because it's powerful, but because it's gentle enough to use anywhere without causing harm. That's the thing about chamomile. It's safe. Kids can drink it, pregnant women can drink it in moderation. Elderly people with complicated medication lists can usually add chamomile without interactions. It doesn't compete with pharmaceuticals. It just quietly does its work in the background while the louder medicines take credit. There's a particular loneliness to insomnia. You're awake while the world sleeps, and the silence feels accusatory, like you're failing at something everyone else does effortlessly. Chamomile doesn't shame you for that. It doesn't say you should be better at sleeping. It just offers a small, warm thing to hold while you wait for your body to remember how. In clinical trials, researchers noticed something they didn't expect. People who drank chamomile tea reported feeling less alone. Not because the tea has social properties, but because the ritual of making it boiling water, steeping flowers, holding a warm cup, creates a moment of self-care that feels like being taken care of, even if you're the one doing it for yourself. Apigenin crosses the blood-brain barrier easily. That's the selective membrane that protects your brain from most substances in your bloodstream. It only lets through molecules that are small and lipophilic fat-loving. Apigenin is both. So within 30 minutes of drinking chamomile tea, it's already in your brain, already binding to those GABA A receptors, already beginning the slow work of turning down the noise. But it's not immediate. It's not a light switch. It's more like watching a sunset. You don't notice the exact moment the sky changes from blue to orange. You just look up eventually and realize, oh, something shifted. That's how chamomile works. Gradual, cumulative, gentle. The flowers bloom in late spring and early summer. They open during the day and close at night, which feels almost too symbolic to be real, but it is. They follow circadian rhythms just like you do. They know when to be active and when to rest. Maybe that's part of why they help. They're already fluent in the language of cycles. You can grow chamomile in a pot on a windowsill. It doesn't need much. Sunlight, water, decent soil. It self-seeds so if you plant it once it keeps coming back. A gift that renews itself. Every summer, more flowers, more tea. More quiet nights where the world shrinks down to just you and a cup. And the slow realization that maybe tonight's sleep won't be a battle. It might just be a door you walk through. Gently, without force. With something that tastes like being held by someone who doesn't need you to explain why you're tired. Roots know things leaves will never understand. They grow in complete darkness, feeling their way through soil by touch alone, navigating around stones and bones and the compressed history of everything that ever fell and didn't get back up. Valerian root is like that. Dense, ancient, unapologetic about what it is. Valeriana officinalis. The name sounds medical, but the plant itself has been growing wild in European meadows and Asian hillsides for so long that nobody remembers a time before it. Romans called it fou because of the smell, a name that tells you everything you need to know about first impressions. It smells like wet earth, old socks, something vaguely fermented, not pleasant, not something you'd pick for a bouquet. But your brain doesn't care about pleasant. Your brain cares about chemistry. And valerian root contains compounds that speak directly to the part of you that forgot how to stop watching the ceiling at 3 a.m. The active ingredient, if you can call it that, since valerian has over 100 compounds working together, is valerianic acid. It's a sesquiterpene, which is just a fancy way of saying it's built from 3 isoprene units arranged in a specific shape. That shape matters. It fits into receptor sites in your brain that regulate GABA. But here's where valerian is different from chamomile or lavender. Those plants bind to GABA receptors and activate them directly. Valerian does something subtler. It inhibits the breakdown of GABA that's already there. Your brain produces GABA naturally, it's your primary calming neurotransmitter. But an enzyme called GABA transaminase breaks it down, clears it away, makes room for more stimulating signals. Valerianic acid blocks that enzyme. Not completely, just enough. So, the GABA you already made gets to linger a little longer. It's like turning down the drain in a bathtub while the water's running. You're not adding more water. You're just letting what's there stay. In 2010, a researcher named Fernandez San Martin published a meta-analysis looking at 18 different clinical trials on valerian. Meta-analyses are important because they don't just look at one study. They synthesize results from multiple studies, thousands of participants trying to find patterns that hold across different populations and methods. The conclusion, valerian improved sleep quality in 80% of trials. Not every person in every trial, but enough that the effect was statistically significant. The typical dose was between 400 and 900 milligrams of extract taken 1 to 2 hours before bed. Some people needed the higher end. Some people responded to less. Bodies are different. Brains are different. But the really interesting finding was about sleep architecture. That's the technical term for how your brain moves through different stages of sleep: light sleep, deep sleep, REM sleep. Back to light, the whole cycle repeating 4 or 5 times a night if everything goes right. Valerian didn't just make people feel more rested. It actually increased time spent in slow wave sleep. That's the deep restorative stage where your brain consolidates memories, your body repairs tissue, your immune system does its best work. People in the valerian studies spent an average of 15 to 20 minutes more per night in that stage. That's not trivial. That's the difference between waking up foggy and waking up functional. A more recent study in 2020 by Shinjo and colleagues focused on something even more specific: sleep latency. That's the time between when you close your eyes with the intention of sleeping and when you actually fall asleep. For people with insomnia, that window can stretch into an hour, 90 minutes longer. Every minute feels like 5. You start calculating how much sleep you'll get. If you fall asleep right now, then right now, then right now. And the math itself becomes another reason you can't sleep. Valerian reduced sleep latency by an average of 15.8 minutes. Not instantly, not dramatically, just enough that the gap between wanting to sleep and sleeping narrows. The cliff edge gets a little less steep. Hippocrates wrote about valerian in 400 BCE. He didn't call it a sleep aid. He called it a remedy for nervous tension, which is ancient Greek for your mind won't shut up and it's making you miserable. He prescribed it for anxiety, restlessness, the kind of agitation that makes your hands shake and your thoughts race even when nothing particularly bad is happening. Medieval herbalists believed valerian could calm hysteria, not the modern definition exaggerated emotion, but the old one, which was any ailment thought to originate in the uterus. Women with insomnia, night terrors, unexplained pain were given valerian tinctures. The diagnosis was wrong, obviously. The remedy, though, sometimes worked. Not because wombs cause insomnia, but because stressed nervous systems do, and valerian addresses that. During World War II, when London was under air raids and the whole city existed in a state of perpetual low-grade terror, British doctors prescribed valerian to civilians who couldn't sleep. Not soldiers. Civilians. People trying to live normal lives while bombs fell at unpredictable intervals and the future felt like a coin flip between survival and oblivion. Valerian didn't make the bombs stop. It didn't make the fear go away. It just made it possible to sleep in spite of the fear. And sometimes that's all you need, not the absence of stress, but the ability to rest even when stress is still in the room. The root takes 2 years to mature before harvest. You can't rush it. Farmers plant valerian in spring, let it grow through summer, cut it back in fall, let it overwinter, let it grow again, and only then in the second autumn do they dig up the roots. By that point, the roots are thick gnarled, dense with the compounds that took 2 full cycles of seasons to concentrate. You can buy valerian as capsules, tinctures, teas, tablets. The capsules hide the smell which most people prefer. The tincture is more bioavailable. It gets into your bloodstream faster, but it tastes as bad as it smells. The tea is somewhere in between. Earthy, bitter, something you drink not because you enjoy it, but because you're negotiating with your own neurology. Some people take valerian every night. Some take it only when insomnia spikes. Some combine it with other herbs, hops, passion flower, lemon balm, because there's evidence that certain combinations work synergistically. The whole becomes more than the sum of parts. But that's true for most plants. They evolved in ecosystems, not laboratories. They're used to collaborating. There's a small percentage of people, maybe 5 to 10%, for whom valerian has the opposite effect. Instead of calming, it agitates. Instead of sleep restlessness. Nobody knows exactly why. Genetic variations in how the liver metabolizes valerianic acid probably. Or differences in baseline GABA levels. Or something else entirely that hasn't been identified yet. That's the thing about herbal medicine. It's not one size fits all. It's not predictable in the way pharmaceuticals try to be. But for the 80 to 90% of people who respond well, valerian becomes a quiet ally, something you keep in the cabinet for the nights when everything else has failed. The smell never gets better, by the way. People who've used valerian for years say you get used to it, but that's not quite accurate. You don't get used to it, you just stop caring. Because by the time the smell hits your nose, you're already thinking about how it felt last time, the softening of your jaw, the loosening of your shoulders, the way your thoughts started spacing out instead of piling up. Your body learns the association. Smell becomes signal. The scent that once repelled starts meaning relief is coming. Not immediately, but soon. And knowing that is sometimes enough to start the process before the compounds even hit your bloodstream. Valerian doesn't erase the day. It doesn't make you forget why you're tired or stressed or scared. It just makes your nervous system willing to stand down for a few hours, to stop treating sleep like a luxury you haven't earned, and start treating it like a biological necessity your body is allowed to claim. Not every night will be perfect, but some nights will be better. And better accumulated over weeks and months starts to feel like a version of yourself you thought you'd lost. Sometimes the names we give things tell us more about ourselves than about the thing itself. Spanish missionaries arrived in the Americas in 1569 and saw a flower with 5 petals, 3 stigmas, a corona of filaments radiating outward like a crown. They named it Passiflora passion flower because they saw the crucifixion in its structure. The petals were the apostles. The corona was the crown of thorns. They saw suffering where native people had seen relief. The Algonquin tribes had been using passion flower for insomnia and restlessness long before anyone called it passion or flower or anything in Latin. They crushed the leaves into paste, mixed it with water, drank it when the mind wouldn't settle. They didn't write it down. They didn't need to. Knowledge moved through demonstration repetition, the quiet watching of what worked and what didn't across generations. Passiflora incarnata. That's the species used medicinally. Incarnata means made flesh, which is both poetic and accurate in a way the missionaries didn't intend. This plant makes the invisible visible. It takes the shapeless hum of anxiety, the kind that doesn't attach to anything specific, just hovers like static and gives it somewhere to go. Inside passion flower lies a compound called chrysin. It's a flavonoid similar to apigenin in chamomile, but it works slightly differently. Chrysin binds to GABA-A receptors, yes, but it also modulates something called the benzodiazepine binding site. That's the same site where medications like Xanax and Valium attach. But chrysin doesn't hit it as hard, it's gentler. Less like flipping a switch and more like slowly turning down a dimmer. There's also benzoflavone, another compound that works synergistically with chrysin. Together they increase GABA activity without forcing it. They make your brain more receptive to the calming signals it's already producing, but somehow not hearing. Like turning up the volume on a voice that's been whispering the whole time. In 2011, researchers named Ngan and Conduit at the University of Melbourne ran a small study on passion flower tea. They gave it to participants for 7 nights, not a long time, just enough to see if effects were immediate or cumulative. They measured sleep using polysomnography, those electrodes that track brain waves, eye movements, muscle tension, all the invisible architecture of how you rest. The results were modest but real. Total sleep time increased by an average of 26 minutes. Not a dramatic shift, not life-changing on its own, but meaningful when you've been operating on sleep debt for months or years. 26 minutes multiplied by 365 nights is over 150 hours. That's almost a week of extra sleep per year, accumulated in small increments you might not even notice night to night. But the more interesting finding was subjective. People reported their sleep quality improved by 5% on a standardized rating scale. 5% sounds tiny until you realize the scale measures things like how refreshed did you feel and how hard was it to fall asleep. Participants said sleep felt easier, less fought for, less like something they had to earn or deserve or achieve through perfect conditions. Another study in 2011, this one, by Appel and colleagues in Germany, looked at passion flower for pre-surgery anxiety. They gave patients either passion flower extract or midazolam, a pharmaceutical sedative commonly used before medical procedures. Both groups showed similar reductions in anxiety, around 42%. But the passion flower group had fewer side effects. No grogginess, no memory impairment. Just calm without the cognitive cost, 42%. That's the difference between pacing the hospital hallway and sitting quietly with a magazine you're not really reading but at least holding. Between obsessively checking the clock and letting time pass at whatever speed it wants. Between white-knuckling through fear and just being in a room with it without needing it to leave. The Native American use of passion flower wasn't documented in writing until European settlers started recording it in the 1700s, but oral history suggests it goes back much further. The Cherokee used it for weaning babies, believing it soothed the distress of transition. The Huma used it for boils and cuts, not because it's antiseptic, but because anxiety slows healing and passion flower addresses that underlying tension. Traditional Chinese medicine incorporated passion flower later in the 19th century, calling it Zhai Fan Lian. They classified it as cooling, slightly bitter, entering the heart and liver meridians. In their framework, insomnia often stems from excess heat in the heart, not literal temperature, but an energetic quality. Overthinking, overstimulation, the kind of heat that keeps the mind circling the same thoughts like a dog that can't find the right spot to lie down. Passion flower cools that, not by numbing, but by creating space between you and the urgency. The thoughts don't stop. They just stop demanding immediate attention. You can let them exist without needing to solve them right this second at 2 a.m. when your problem-solving skills are compromised by exhaustion anyway. You can find passion flower as tea tincture or capsules. The tea is mild, slightly grassy, not bitter like valerian. 1 teaspoon of dried herbs steeped for 10 minutes in hot water. Some people add it to chamomile or lemon balm, creating blends where each plant supports the others. The tincture is stronger, more concentrated. 30 to 40 drops in water, taken an hour before bed. The timing matters. Passion flower isn't immediate. It needs time to move through your digestive system, get absorbed into your bloodstream, cross the blood-brain barrier, find its receptor sites, do its work. If you take it at 9 p.m., hoping to sleep at 9:15, you'll be disappointed. But if you take it at 9 and let it settle, let it build. Let it change the baseline of your nervous system while you're brushing your teeth and reading a few pages and turning off lights. By the time you lie down, something has shifted. Not dramatically. You won't feel drugged or heavy. You'll just notice that the usual mental loop, the rehearsing of tomorrow's conversations, the replaying of today's mistakes, the cataloging of everything that could go wrong, has lost some of its grip. The thoughts are there, but they're quieter, smaller, less convincing. There's a particular type of anxiety that only shows up at bedtime. During the day, you're fine, functional, competent. But the moment you turn off the lights and there's nothing left to distract you, everything you've been pushing aside comes flooding in. Every unfinished task, every unresolved tension, every what-if scenario, your brain has been quietly compiling while you were too busy to notice. Passion flower doesn't solve those things. It doesn't make the tasks finished or the tensions resolved. It just makes them less urgent. It gives you permission to set them down for a few hours to acknowledge that right now lying in bed, you can't actually do anything about them anyway, so why carry them? The flower itself is intricate. If you look closely, it's almost architectural, geometric patterns, symmetrical arrangements, a complexity that seems engineered. But it's not. It evolved. Every structure serves a function usually related to attracting specific pollinators or protecting against specific threats. Beauty as byproduct of survival strategy. Maybe that's why it works on humans. We evolved too. Our anxiety responses were survival strategies, once hypervigilance keeping us alive in environments where actual threats existed. But now, the threats are mostly abstractions, deadlines, bills, conversations we mishandled, things our nervous system treats with the same alarm it once reserved for predators. Passion flower doesn't turn off the alarm, it recalibrates it. It helps your nervous system distinguish between actual danger and the 99% of modern life that feels dangerous but isn't. Not perfectly, not every time, but enough that sleep becomes possible without requiring total resolution of every problem. Some herbalists call it the anxiety whisperer, not because it's quiet, but because it works below the volume of conscious thought. You don't feel it happening. You just notice after a while that you're breathing deeper, that your shoulders dropped, that the tight feeling in your chest loosened without you trying to make it. And sometimes that's the kind of help you need most. Not loud intervention, but quiet companionship. Something that sits beside your fear and doesn't tell you to stop being afraid. Just makes the fear less lonely. Bees have preferences. They're not indiscriminate visitors to every flower that happens to be blooming. They choose. And given the option between 100 different plants, honeybees will swarm to lemon balm like it's the only thing worth their time. The Greeks noticed this. They called it melissa, their word for honeybee, and planted it near hives to keep the colonies happy and productive. Melissa officinalis. The scientific name is just the Greek word twice, over which tells you how important bees considered this plant, and how much humans trusted bees to know which plants mattered. If something draws that much focused attention from creatures whose survival depends on making good choices, maybe we should pay attention too. Lemon balm doesn't look like much. Small green leaves, slightly fuzzy, growing in clumps that spread aggressively if you let them. Crush a leaf between your fingers and it smells bright citrusy clean. Like summer condensed into a scent. Like the opposite of the heavy earthy smell of valerian or the slightly medicinal edge of chamomile. Lemon balm smells like optimism if optimism had a chemical signature. That scent comes from compounds called terpenes, citronellol, citral geraniol. They're volatile oils that evaporate easily, which is why you smell them when you crush the leaves. But the therapeutic compounds are different. Rosmarinic acid, caffeic acid. These are polyphenols, antioxidants that do more than just smell nice. They cross the blood-brain barrier and start changing the conversation between neurons. Rosmarinic acid inhibits an enzyme called GABA transaminase. That's the same enzyme valerian blocks, but lemon balm does it through a different mechanism. GABA transaminase breaks down GABA after it's done its job, clearing it away so the next signal can come through. When you inhibit that enzyme, GABA lingers. It keeps doing its calming work for longer than your brain originally intended. But lemon balm also does something else. It modulates acetylcholine receptors, specifically the nicotinic and muscarinic types. Acetylcholine is your brain's attention neurotransmitter. It helps you focus, remember, process information. Too little and you're foggy. Too much and you're wired, overstimulated, unable to settle. Lemon balm doesn't reduce acetylcholine. It regulates it. It helps your brain use what it has more efficiently, which sounds paradoxical. How can the same plant calm you down and help you focus, but it's not? Calm and focus aren't opposites, they're partners. You can't actually focus when you're anxious. Your attention scatters. Your working memory shrinks. Lemon balm creates the conditions where focus becomes possible by removing the static. In 2011, a researcher named Cases published a study in the Mediterranean Journal of Nutrition and Metabolism. Participants took 600 milligrams of lemon balm extract daily for 15 days. Not a long time. Just over 2 weeks. They measured anxiety using standardized scales, the kind that ask questions like, how often do you feel nervous? And how much does worry interfere with daily life? Anxiety scores dropped by 18%. Sleep quality improved by 42%. And here's the interesting part. The improvement started showing up within a week, not after months of consistent use, but within 7 days. That suggests lemon balm isn't working through long-term neuroplasticity or gradual rebalancing. It's doing something more immediate. Another study by Kennedy in 2003 looked at acute effects, what happens within hours of taking lemon balm. Participants took 300 milligrams and then completed cognitive tasks, while researchers measured their mood and alertness. Within 1 hour, self-reported calmness increased by 25%. But alertness didn't decrease. That's unusual. Most things that calm you down also make you drowsy. Lemon balm found a different pathway. The participants described feeling relaxed but clear. Like the volume on their internal monologue had been turned down, but they could still hear everything they needed to hear, just without the urgency, without the sense that every thought required immediate action. Medieval monks called lemon balm the gladdening herb. They grew it in monastery gardens alongside lavender and rosemary, using it for what they called melancholia, a term that covered everything from grief to depression to the kind of free-floating sadness that arrives for no reason and overstays its welcome. The monks would steep fresh leaves in wine, believing the combination lifted spirits and drove away all troublesome cares. They weren't wrong. Modern research shows lemon balm increases the availability of serotonin and dopamine in the brain, not by adding more, but by slowing their reuptake. Your brain releases these neurotransmitters naturally: serotonin for mood regulation, dopamine for motivation and reward. But reuptake pumps quickly recycle them, pulling them back into storage before they've had time to do much. Lemon balm blocks those pumps just enough. So the serotonin and dopamine you already made get to linger in the synaptic gap a little longer, doing their work more thoroughly. Dioscorides, the Greek physician in the 1st century AD, wrote that lemon balm drives away all troublesome cares and worries from the mind. He prescribed it in wine, which probably helped too, but the lemon balm was doing work independent of the alcohol. He noted it was especially useful for students and scholars, People whose minds were constantly active processing information, unable to rest even when the work was done. That's the thing about lemon balm. It's not for people who can't think. It's for people who can't stop thinking. For the ones who lie in bed, mentally writing emails, they don't need to send planning conversations that won't happen, solving problems that aren't actually problems. Lemon balm doesn't shut off the thinking. It just makes the thinking less compulsive. You can grow lemon balm in a pot on a sunny windowsill. It's almost impossible to kill. It wants to grow. It wants to spread. You can harvest leaves all summer, drying them for tea or using them fresh. 2 to 3 teaspoons of fresh leaves per cup of hot water, steeped for 5 to 10 minutes. The tea is mild, slightly sweet, refreshing even when it's hot. You can drink it cold in summer, which is when lemon balm grows most vigorously anyway, like it knows when you need it most. Some people add honey, some add a slice of lemon doubling down on the citrus, some mix it with chamomile or passion flower, creating blends where the plants support each other. Lemon balm is a good team player. It doesn't compete with other herbs. It enhances them. There's evidence that lemon balm improves cognitive performance in people with mild Alzheimer's disease. A study in 2003 gave patients 60 drops of lemon balm extract twice daily for 4 months. Cognitive scores improved. Agitation decreased. Quality of life increased for both patients and caregivers. The mechanism isn't fully understood, but it probably relates to acetylcholine. Alzheimer's involves the progressive loss of cholinergic neurons, the ones that use acetylcholine. Lemon balm helps the brain use its remaining acetylcholine more efficiently. That same mechanism might explain why lemon balm helps with sleep without making you groggy the next day. It's not sedating you. It's optimizing the neurotransmitter systems that regulate arousal and rest, helping your brain shift between states more smoothly. Falling asleep becomes easier. Waking up becomes clearer. The transition points, which are often the hardest parts, become less abrupt. In traditional Persian medicine, lemon balm was considered a heart tonic. Not for the physical heart, though they used it for that too, but for the emotional heart. The part that holds affection, joy, the capacity to be moved by beauty. They believe prolonged stress hardens. That part makes it less responsive, less able to feel the good things, even when they're present. Lemon balm softens it, reopens it, not dramatically, but gradually, like thawing. There's a particular quality to lemon balm that's hard to describe. It doesn't hit you. It doesn't arrive with fanfare. It's subtle, cumulative, gentle. You drink the tea, and half an hour later, you realize you haven't checked your phone in 20 minutes. You're just sitting, breathing, noticing the light through the window, or the sound of rain, or the fact that, for this moment at least, nothing is urgently wrong. That might be all calm really is. Not the absence of problems, but the temporary suspension of the belief that you need to solve them all right now. Lemon balm gives you that suspension. That brief window where everything can just be what it is, without requiring your immediate intervention. And maybe that's enough. Maybe learning to rest inside that window, even for an hour, even while everything else is still unsolved and imperfect, is its own kind of achievement. There are discoveries that happen by accident, the kind where nobody was looking for an answer, but stumbled into one anyway, while doing something completely unrelated. 9th century monks in Bavaria were growing hops for beer. That was the whole purpose, preserving the brew, adding bitterness to balance the sweetness of malt. But they noticed something odd during harvest season. The workers who spent all day picking hops, reaching into the climbing vines and pulling off the green cone-shaped flowers, would fall asleep easily, deeply, even after long days of repetitive labor in the summer heat. The monks didn't have polysomnography or peer-reviewed journals. They just had observation and willingness to ask why. Why would picking a plant make you tired when picking other plants didn't? What was in the hops that fingers absorbed through skin or nose, breathed in from air that made sleep so effortless? Humulus lupulus. The female flowers are what we call hops, those papery green cones that look decorative but contain something potent. Inside those cones, nestled between the petals, is a yellow powder called lupulin. It's sticky, resinous, bitter. Brewers know it well. It's what makes beer taste like beer instead of sweet grain water. But lupulin also contains compounds that affect your brain. One of them is 2-methyl-3-butan-2-OL. It's a breakdown product of humulone and lupulone, the alpha acids that give beer its bitterness. When those acids degrade through heat time or fermentation, they produce this alcohol compound. And that compound binds to both GABA receptors and melatonin receptors in your brain. GABA, you know by now. It's the main inhibitory neurotransmitter, the one that tells your neurons to slow down, ease up, stop firing so intensely. But melatonin receptors are different. Melatonin is the hormone your pineal gland releases when darkness falls, signaling to your body that it's time to initiate the sleep process. When something binds to melatonin receptors, it mimics that signal. It tells your body night is here, whether or not the sun has actually set. In 2012, researchers named Franco and colleagues published a study in PLOS One, looking at non-alcoholic beer enriched with hops. They gave it to university students during a stressful period exam season, when sleep is both desperately needed and impossibly hard to achieve. The students drank one bottle of this hop-rich beer every evening for 2 weeks, non-alcoholic, so any effects couldn't be attributed to alcohol's sedative properties. Sleep latency. The time it took to fall asleep decreased by an average of 2.5 minutes. That doesn't sound like much, but consider these were people already lying in bed trying to sleep. Shaving even a few minutes off that anxious window between wanting to sleep and actually sleeping is significant. It's the difference between lying there, calculating how many hours you'll get if you fall asleep right now, versus actually drifting off while you're still trying to do the math. They also measured nighttime activity using actigraphy, a wristband that tracks movement. The hops group moved less during sleep. Not because they were paralyzed, but because they weren't waking up as often, weren't tossing and turning as much, weren't surfacing into that light sleep where every sound registers and every thought has volume. Another study in 2006 by Schiller looked at combining hops with valerian. The idea was to see if the synergy between the two plants produced effects greater than either alone. They compared the combination to a pharmaceutical sleep aid, specifically a benzodiazepine derivative. Both groups improved, but the hops valerian group had fewer side effects. No morning grogginess, no rebound insomnia when they stopped taking it. Just cleaner sleep with cleaner waking. Victorian England had a tradition of hops pillows. People would stuff small cloth sacks with dried hops and sleep with them under their regular pillows. The scent was supposed to induce sleep. It wasn't just folklore. The volatile oils in hops myrcene, humulene, caryophyllene do have mild sedative properties when inhaled. They're aromatic terpenes, similar to what you find in lavender or chamomile, but with a different chemical signature and a much stronger smell. Hops smell bitter green, slightly skunky. It's not unpleasant exactly, but it's not gentle either. It's assertive. It announces itself. Some people find it comforting, that boldness. It doesn't whisper. It just states, this is what calm smells like, take it or leave it. The practice of using hops for sleep became so common in 19th century hospitals that nurses would make hops pillows for patients with chronic insomnia. They noticed it worked best for people whose sleeplessness came from overstimulation, racing, thoughts, restlessness, the kind of wired but tired where your body is exhausted, but your brain won't disengage. The hops didn't sedate, they settled. Humulus lupulus is a climbing vine. It can grow 20 feet in a single season, twining counterclockwise around anything vertical, trellises poles, other plants. It's aggressive in the way plants sometimes are when they've found a niche they fit perfectly. And maybe that's part of why it works for sleep. It knows how to climb out of one state and into another. It understands transition. The female and male plants are separate. Only the females produce the cones used for brewing and medicine. The males produce pollen and nothing else useful to humans. So, commercial hops farms are almost entirely female. Acres and acres of climbing vines, all female producing cones that will never be fertilized because there are no male plants nearby. They are suspended in a permanent state of potential that never actualizes. It's strange when you think about it, purposeful incompletion. But maybe that's appropriate for a plant that helps with sleep. Sleep is suspended potential too. You're not doing anything productive. You're not moving forward. You're paused. And that pause is where restoration happens. In the not doing, in the potential that doesn't need to become actual to have value. You can buy hops as tea, though it's bitter enough that most people mix it with other herbs, chamomile to soften the flavor, valerian to strengthen the effect, mint to add some brightness. Or you can take it as a tincture or capsule, which bypasses the taste entirely. The typical dose is 300 to 500 milligrams of extract taken an hour before bed. Some people keep dried hops in small sachets near their bed, not under the pillow, but nearby, so the scent drifts into the room without being overwhelming. The oils degrade over time, so you need to replace them every few months. But for those months, there's something about the smell, earthy herbal, faintly metallic, that signals to your brain this is the time for letting go. It's strange that the same plant used to make people social and talkative in bars is also used to make them quiet and sleepy in bedrooms. But maybe it's not a contradiction. Maybe hops just knows how to facilitate transition. Sober to relaxed, awake to asleep, anxious to settled. It's a plant of thresholds. The bitterness matters, by the way. When you taste something bitter, your vagus nerve activates. That's the nerve that runs from your brainstem down through your chest and abdomen, connecting your brain to your heart, lungs, and digestive system. It's part of your parasympathetic nervous system, the rest and digest branch. Bitter compounds stimulate that nerve, which then sends signals back to your brain: ease up, slow down. You're safe enough to digest, which means you're safe enough to sleep. So even if you hate the taste of hops tea, that bitterness is doing something useful. It's not punishment, it's information. Your body understands bitter as a cue for caution, but also for slowing down to process whatever you just consumed. And sometimes slowing down is exactly what you need. The monks who first noticed the hops harvesters falling asleep didn't know about 2-methyl-3-butan-2-ol or GABA receptors or melatonin mimicry. They just knew that something in those green cones changed people, made them drowsy, made them rest easier. They didn't need to understand the mechanism to recognize the effect. And maybe that's okay. Maybe not everything needs to be fully explained to be useful. Sometimes observation is enough. Sometimes noticing what works and using it gently, repeatedly, patiently is its own form of understanding. Some knowledge travels slowly, crossing continents over centuries, carried by traders and monks and people who noticed something worked and wanted to share it before they died. Magnolia bark is like that. It's been used in traditional Chinese medicine for over 2,000 years, but Western science didn't pay attention until the 1990s, when Japanese researchers started asking why this particular tree bark kept appearing in formulas for anxiety and insomnia. Magnolia officinalis. The species name means official, as in officially recognized, medically endorsed, included in pharmacopoeias long before the concept of peer review existed. The bark is thick aromatic when you break it slightly, sweet and slightly bitter at the same time. Chinese physicians called it hupo, and they prescribed it for what they described as stagnation in the chest, a feeling of tightness, heaviness, the sensation that breath can't quite reach the bottom of your lungs, even though nothing is physically wrong. Modern research would call that anxiety, the feeling that something is sitting on your chest, that your throat is narrower than it used to be, that air isn't quite enough even when you're breathing normally. Your body is responding to perceived threat by preparing to run or fight, which means shunting resources away from digestion and deep breathing and directing them toward muscles and alertness. Magnolia bark tells your body there's no threat. You can stop preparing. The active compounds are hinokiol and magnolol. They're phenolic compounds related to the same family as the polyphenols in green tea and dark chocolate, but with a different structure that gives them different effects. Hinokiol makes up about 2 to 5% of the bark by weight. Magnolol is slightly less, around 1 to 2%. Small amounts but potent. Both compounds bind to GABA A receptors, which you've heard about multiple times now, because almost every calming herb works through this pathway. But hinokiol and magnolol do something additional. They reduce cortisol, not by suppressing your adrenal glands, the organs that produce cortisol, but by modulating the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis. The HPA axis is your body's stress response system. When you perceive threat, your hypothalamus signals your pituitary gland, which signals your adrenals, which release cortisol. It's a cascade, and once it starts, it tends to keep going. Hinokiol interrupts that cascade, not at the beginning, but midstream. It tells the pituitary ease up on the signal, which means the adrenals don't get the memo to keep pumping out cortisol, which means your cortisol levels start returning to baseline even while the original stressor is theoretically ongoing. In 2008, researchers named Kalman published a study in the Journal of the International Society of Sports Nutrition. They gave participants 250 milligrams of magnolia bark extract daily for 4 weeks. The participants were healthy adults under chronic mild stress, not crisis. Just the ongoing low-level pressure of work and relationships and bills and traffic and all the small accumulated weight of being alive in the 21st century. After 4 weeks, cortisol levels dropped by an average of 18%. That's substantial. Cortisol is necessary. It wakes you up in the morning, gives you energy, helps you respond to actual danger. But chronically elevated cortisol erodes everything. It disrupts sleep, weakens immune function, impairs memory, increases inflammation. Bringing it down by even 15 or 20% creates space for your body to repair instead of constantly defending. But the more interesting finding was about DHEA. That's dehydroepiandrosterone, an adrenal hormone that opposes cortisol. Think of them as a seesaw. When cortisol goes up, DHEA usually goes down. When cortisol dominates, long-term DHEA gets depleted, which accelerates aging and reduces resilience. In the magnolia bark group, DHEA increased by 227%, more than doubled. That's not just lowering stress, that's rebuilding the capacity to handle stress. A different study in 2012 by Xu and colleagues focused specifically on sleep. They gave magnolia bark extract to people with insomnia and measured both subjective reports, how do you feel, and objective data. What do the sleep trackers show? Sleep onset latency decreased by 23%. The time between lying down and falling asleep shrank by almost a quarter. But more importantly, nighttime awakenings decreased. People weren't waking up as often, and when they did wake up, they fell back asleep faster. The Shaneng Benkao Jing, a Chinese medical text from around 280, lists magnolia bark under the category of middle-class herbs. Not the ones you take for acute crisis, but the ones you take for chronic imbalance. It describes magnolia bark as warming, moving stuck energy, calming the spirit. They didn't use the word anxiety. They said restless spirit, which might be more accurate anyway. Anxiety isn't just mental. It's a restlessness that lives in your whole body in the way you hold your shoulders or clench your jaw or breathe shallow, even when you're trying to relax. Magnolia bark addresses that, not by sedating, but by giving your nervous system permission to shift out of defense mode. It's not telling you there's nothing to worry about. It's telling your body you can worry if you want, but you don't have to mobilize all your resources for it. You can keep some energy in reserve. You can breathe deeper. You can unclench. The bark itself is harvested from mature trees, usually 15 to 20 years old. Younger trees don't have enough accumulated hinokiol. Older trees produce more, but they're also rarer, slower to replace. Sustainable harvesting means stripping only the outer layers of bark and leaving the inner layers intact so the tree survives. Done right, the tree regrows what was taken. Done wrong, you kill the tree for a single harvest. That tension between taking what you need and preserving what sustains you is built into the plant's story. It's a metaphor that doesn't need explaining because the bark itself embodies it. You can't have the medicine without respecting the limits of the source. The taste is hard to describe. Woody, obviously, slightly spicy, vaguely floral in a way that doesn't quite make sense for bark. If you chew a small piece, which some traditional practitioners recommend for acute anxiety, it numbs your tongue slightly. That's the magnolol acting on nerve endings. The numbness isn't harmful, it's just information. Your body registering that something bioactive is present. Most people take magnolia bark as capsules or tincture, rather than chewing the raw bark, which is unpleasant and impractical. The standard dose is 200 to 400 milligrams of extract, standardized to 2% hanakiol. You take it in the evening about an hour before bed. Some people take it in divided doses, half in the late afternoon, half before bed, because the cortisol reduction helps with that late-day anxiety spike when you're tired, but your mind won't downshift. Hanakiol also crosses the blood-brain barrier easily, which not all compounds do. The blood-brain barrier is selective protective, designed to keep most substances in your bloodstream from reaching your brain tissue. Only small, fat-soluble molecules get through. Hanakiol qualifies, so within 30 to 60 minutes of taking magnolia bark, the active compounds are already in your brain, already binding to receptors, already changing the neurochemical conversation. But the effects are subtle. You don't feel drugged, you don't feel sedated. You just feel like the constant low-level hum of vigilance has been turned down a few notches. Like you can sit in a quiet room without your mind immediately trying to fill the silence with tasks and worries and plans. Like your body remembers it's allowed to rest without waiting for perfect conditions. Traditional Chinese medicine has a concept called Shen, which loosely translates to spirit, but really means something more like the animating consciousness that makes you feel like yourself. When Shen is disturbed by chronic stress, by fear, by grief, you feel disconnected from your own life. You're going through motions, but not really present. Magnolia bark is classified as a Shen calming herb. It doesn't change your circumstances, it just helps you stay anchored in yourself while navigating them. Western medicine doesn't have an equivalent framework, but it has cortisol and HPA axis, dysregulation, and allostatic load, the cumulative burden of chronic stress on your body's systems. Different language for the same observation. Sometimes the problem isn't what's happening to you, but that your body has been in emergency mode for so long, it forgot how to stand down. Magnolia bark teaches your body how to stand down. Not permanently, not magically. Just for a few hours. Just enough that sleep becomes possible without requiring the complete resolution of every problem first. And maybe that's all you need some nights. Not answers, just a pause. Just the temporary suspension of the belief that you have to fix everything before you're allowed to close your eyes. Names carry weight, especially when they're given in languages older than the countries that speak them now. Ashwagandha is Sanskrit. Ashva means horse. Gandha means smell, horse smell, which sounds unflattering until you understand what they meant. The root smells earthy, musky, strong, like a stable after rain. But also it's supposed to give you the strength and vitality of a horse, the stamina, the ability to carry heavy loads without breaking. With Annea somnifera, that's the Latin name, and somnifera is the part that matters for sleep. It literally means sleep-inducing, not sleep-adjacent or sleep-supportive, sleep-inducing. The plant's name announces its purpose like a job title. Ashwagandha grows wild across India, the Middle East, parts of Africa. It's a shrubby plant with small green flowers and red berries that look cheerful but aren't used medicinally. The magic is in the root, thick gnarled pale when you cut into it, releasing that distinctive smell that's simultaneously off-putting and oddly reassuring. Like the plant is saying, I'm not here to be pleasant, I'm here to work. The roots contain compounds called withanolides. There are over 35 different types, but the one that gets the most research attention is withaferin A. It's a steroidal lactone, which sounds complicated, but really just means it's structurally related to hormones like cortisol and testosterone. That structural similarity lets it interact with your endocrine system, the network of glands and hormones that regulate stress response, sleep-wake cycles, inflammation, basically everything that keeps you functional or prevents you from being functional. Withaferin A doesn't replace your hormones, it modulates them. It works on the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis, the same system magnolia bark affects, but through different mechanisms. Ashwagandha seems to normalize the HPA axis when it's been dysregulated by chronic stress. If your cortisol is too high, typical in chronic stress, ashwagandha helps bring it down. If it's too low, typical in burnout, ashwagandha helps bring it up. It's adaptogenic, meaning it adapts its effects to what your body needs, rather than pushing you in one fixed direction. In 2019, a researcher named Langade published a study in Curious that looked at ashwagandha specifically for insomnia. They recruited adults with diagnosed sleep disorders, not people who occasionally had trouble sleeping, but people for whom insomnia had become chronic, identity-defining, the kind that makes you dread bedtime, because you know what's coming. Half the group got 600 milligrams of ashwagandha root extract daily. The other half got a placebo. Both groups kept sleep diaries, wore actigraphy devices to track movement, filled out standardized questionnaires about sleep quality and mental alertness and overall well-being. After 8 weeks, the ashwagandha group showed a 72% improvement in sleep quality scores, not 7%, 72. Sleep onset latency time to fall asleep decreased by 29%. Total sleep time increased. Sleep efficiency improved, meaning less time spent awake in bed. And mental alertness during the day improved, which is crucial because the point of better sleep isn't just to sleep more, but to function better while awake. Another study in 2012 by Chandrasekhar, published in the Indian Journal of Psychological Medicine, focused on stress and anxiety rather than sleep directly. They gave participants 300 milligrams of ashwagandha twice daily for 60 days. Cortisol levels dropped by 27.9%. Anxiety scores on standardized scales decreased significantly. Participants reported feeling more resilient, more capable of handling daily stressors without collapsing into overwhelm. And here's the interesting connection. Chronic stress is one of the primary causes of insomnia. Not the only cause, but a major one. When your cortisol stays elevated, especially in the evening, when it's supposed to be dropping, it interferes with melatonin production. Your pineal gland reads high cortisol as a signal that it's still daytime, that you're still dealing with threats, that sleep would be dangerous. So it holds back on melatonin, and you lie there exhausted but wired, unable to bridge the gap between tired and sleeping. Ashwagandha breaks that cycle. By lowering cortisol in the evening, it allows melatonin to rise naturally. It doesn't add melatonin your body makes its own. It just removes the obstacle that was blocking your body's normal production. Ayurvedic medicine has used ashwagandha for over 3,000 years. It's classified as a rasayana, which means rejuvenator, or something that promotes longevity. Ayurvedic texts describe it as balancing all three doshas, vata, pitta, kapha, which in that framework means it's universally applicable. Most herbs are targeted specific to one body type or condition. Ashwagandha is broad spectrum. It helps almost everyone with almost everything, which sounds too good to be true, until you realize it's because it works on fundamental systems, stress response, inflammation, immune function, rather than surface symptoms. The traditional preparation involves boiling the root in milk and adding ghee and honey. The fat from the milk and ghee helps with absorption. With analydes are fat-soluble, so they need some lipid vehicle to get into your bloodstream efficiently. The honey makes it palatable because raw ashwagandha root is bitter in a way that persists coating your tongue, making you wish you'd mixed it with something sweeter. Modern extracts bypass the taste issue. KSM-66 and Sensoril are the two most researched forms. Both are standardized extracts, meaning they guarantee a specific percentage of withanalydes in every dose. KSM-66 uses only the root and is standardized to 5% withanalydes. Sensoril uses both root and leaves and is standardized to 10%. Different concentrations, different ratios of specific withanalydes, slightly different effects. Some people respond better to one than the other. There's no universal answer. Bodies are different. The typical dose is 300 to 600 milligrams, usually taken with dinner or shortly before bed. Not because it's sedating, you won't feel drowsy within an hour of taking it, but because it works over the course of the evening to reduce cortisol and create the hormonal environment where sleep becomes possible. Ashwagandha also affects something called GABAergic activity. Not by binding directly to GABA receptors, like most of the plants we've talked about, but by increasing the expression of GABA receptors in certain brain regions. That means, over time, with consistent use, your brain becomes more responsive to its own calming signals. You're not adding more GABA. You're making your brain better at listening to the GABA that's already there. There's emerging research suggesting ashwagandha also impacts the gut microbiome, which might sound unrelated to sleep until you remember that your gut produces a significant portion of your serotonin and communicates with your brain via the vagus nerve. What happens in your digestive system affects your mood, your stress response, your sleep. Ashwagandha seems to shift the bacterial populations in your gut towards strains associated with lower inflammation and better stress resilience. It takes time, not months, but not hours either. Most studies show effects starting around 2 weeks of consistent use with peak benefits around 6 to 8 weeks. That's frustrating if you're hoping for immediate relief, but it's also sustainable. Changes that happen gradually tend to last longer than changes forced quickly. There's a particular kind of exhaustion that comes from being stressed for so long that your body forgot how to relax, even when circumstances improve. You get a vacation and you can't enjoy it because your nervous system is still in high alert. You have a free weekend and you spend it anxious about the work week ahead. You're given permission to rest and you don't know how. Ashwagandha helps with that. Not by forcing relaxation, but by teaching your body that it's allowed to downregulate. That safety doesn't have to be earned through perfect circumstances, that you can rest even while problems remain unsolved. The root grows deep. In dry climates, ashwagandha sends roots down 6 feet or more, searching for water, for sustenance, for whatever it needs to survive. Maybe that's part of why it works. It knows about endurance, about lasting through difficult conditions, about finding resources where others see only depletion. And maybe that's what you need some nights. Not a quick fix, not a shortcut. Just something that understands endurance and helps you remember you're capable of it too. Gold doesn't always mean wealth. Sometimes it just means something bright, growing where you didn't expect brightness. California poppies cover hillsides every spring, turning entire landscapes into waves of orange gold that look like fire frozen mid-spread. They're California's state flower, chosen not for rarity or medicinal value, but for sheer abundance, for the way they transform ordinary hills into something worth stopping to look at. Eschscholzia californica. The name honors Johann Friedrich von Eschscholz, a Baltic German naturalist who sailed with Russian expeditions in the early 1800s and presumably saw these flowers and thought they deserved documentation. But the Chumash people who lived in what's now California had been using the plant for sleep long before anyone gave it a European name. They made tinctures from the petals and roots, drinking them when rest wouldn't come. when worry or pain kept the mind too loud for sleep. Here's what matters: California. Poppy is not the opium poppy. It's not even closely related. Paphiophyr somniferum, the opium poppy, contains morphine, codeine, the bane compounds that bind to opioid receptors and produce euphoria, pain, relief, addiction, respiratory depression, all the things that make opiates both miraculous and dangerous. Eschscholzia californica contains none of those. Zero opiates. The confusion comes from the name poppy and the association people make between poppies and drugs. But California poppy works through completely different pathways. The active compounds are alkaloids called californidine and protopine. They're not opiates. They don't bind to mu or delta or kappa opioid receptors. They work on dopamine receptors, specifically the D2 subtype. Dopamine is your brain's motivation and reward neurotransmitter. Too much dopamine activity, and you're wired restless chasing stimulation. Balance dopamine activity and you feel calm but engaged, present without being driven. Californidine modulates dopamine signaling without blocking it. It's not an antipsychotic that shuts down dopamine transmission. It's gentler. It helps your brain regulate dopamine more smoothly, which has downstream effects on anxiety and sleep. When dopamine is dysregulated, your reward system keeps signaling that you need to do something, find something, achieve something. Even when you're lying in bed trying to sleep, there's a low-level restlessness, a sense that you should be doing something else, something more important. California. Poppy quiets that. It doesn't eliminate motivation. It just removes the urgency, the compulsion, the feeling that rest is wasting time. In 2001, researchers named Roland published a study in phytotherapy research combining California poppy with hawthorn, a heart-supportive herb. They gave the combination to adults with mild to moderate anxiety. After 3 months, sleep quality improved by 38%. Anxiety scores dropped by 40%. And participants reported feeling less on edge, less like they were constantly waiting for the other shoe to drop. The study didn't isolate California poppy from hawthorn, so you can't attribute all the effects to the poppy alone. But hawthorn works primarily on cardiovascular function, heart rate, blood pressure, circulation. The sleep and anxiety benefits likely came from the poppy. Hawthorn just provided the physiological steadiness that made the poppy's effects more noticeable. The Chumash didn't have randomized controlled trials or peer review. They had observation and oral tradition and the accumulated knowledge of generations who paid attention to what worked. They use California poppy for insomnia, yes, but also for toothaches, headaches, the kind of pain that's hard to locate but easy to feel. The plant doesn't numb pain the way opiates do. It just makes pain less consuming, less identity defining. You're aware of it, but it's not the only thing you're aware of. The flowers bloom in spring and summer, opening during the day and closing at night. They're heliotropic, which means they follow the sun. In the morning, they face east. By afternoon, they're facing west. At dusk, they close their petals, folding inward until dawn. They know about cycles, about opening and closing, about responding to light and dark without needing to be told. That circadian responsiveness might be part of why they help with sleep. The alkaloids in the petals accumulate during the day, while the flowers are open, photosynthesizing, processing sunlight into chemical energy. By the time the petals close at night, they're saturated with compounds that signal rest. You're consuming a plant that's already doing what you're trying to do, transitioning from activity to stillness. You can make tea from dried California poppy petals. 1 to 2 teaspoons steeped in hot water for 10 minutes. The tea is mild, slightly bitter golden colored, like the flowers themselves. Or you can take it as a tincture, 30 to 40 drops in water, which is more concentrated and faster acting. Some people grow it in their gardens, not for medicine, but because it's beautiful and low maintenance. It self-seeds, spreads, easily thrives in poor soil. It doesn't need much to do what it does. There's something about plants that grow aggressively spreading, without invitation that suggest resilience. They're not fragile. They're not precious. They adapt. They persist. And maybe that's what makes them good medicine. They've already figured out how to thrive in difficult conditions. And some of that resilience transfers when you consume them. Native California is a region of extremes, hot, dry summers, and cool, wet winters. California poppy evolved to handle that. It blooms when conditions are favorable and goes dormant when they're not. It doesn't try to force growth during drought. It waits. And when rain comes, it explodes into bloom, again covering hillsides like it never left. That rhythm, activity, and rest, bloom, and dormancy is built into the plant's biology. Maybe that's why it helps humans who've forgotten how to rest. It carries the memory of cycles of knowing when to push and when to pause. Your body understands those signals even when your conscious mind has overridden them with deadlines and caffeine and the belief that rest is something you have to earn. California poppy doesn't make you earn rest. It just makes rest feel like a reasonable option instead of a luxury or a failure or something you'll get to eventually when everything else is handled. The petals are delicate, paper thin, easily torn, but the plant itself is tough. It grows in roadside ditches, vacant lots, anywhere the soil has been disturbed. It's a pioneer species, one of the first to colonize bare ground after fire or construction or any other disruption. It moves into spaces other plants avoid and makes them livable again. It prepares the ground for what comes after. And maybe that's what you need some nights. Not a permanent solution, but something that moves into the disrupted spaces in your nervous system and makes them livable enough that other things, deeper rest, sustained calm, actual healing, become possible later. California poppy won't fix chronic insomnia on its own. It won't resolve the underlying causes of anxiety or the life circumstances that make sleep feel impossible. But it creates a foothold, a small space where rest is imaginable, where your body remembers it's allowed to stop defending, stop producing, stop proving. The flowers only bloom for a day or two. Each individual blossom opens, glows bright for a brief window, then withers. But the plant keeps producing new flowers all season long. One fades, another opens. The bloom continues even as individual flowers come and go. Rest is like that too. It's not one perfect night that solves everything. It's a series of small reprieves accumulated over time, each one brief but sufficient. Each one contributing to the overall pattern of a life that includes both effort and ease. Orchestras don't work because every musician is virtuoso. They work because instruments complement each other, filling spaces the others can't reach. A violin can't produce the resonance of a cello. A flute can't match the depth of a bassoon. But together, playing the same piece from different registers, they create something none of them could achieve alone. Plants do this too. Not intentionally, they don't have meetings or sheet music, but through chemistry. When you combine certain herbs, their compounds interact in ways that amplify effects beyond simple addition. It's called the entourage effect, a term borrowed from cannabis research, but applicable to any botanical medicine where multiple active compounds work together. Take valerian and hops. Separately, both help with sleep. Valerian inhibits GABA breakdown, making your existing calming neurotransmitters last longer. Hops binds to melatonin receptors, signaling your body that it's time for rest. Different mechanisms, different pathways, but when you combine them, something unexpected happens. In 2005, a researcher named Wheatley published a study comparing valerian alone, hops alone, and valerian plus hops together. The combination was 30% more effective than either herb used individually. Not 30% better than placebo, 30% better than the herbs already working on their own. That's not additive where 1 + 1 = 2. That's synergistic where 1 + 1 = 3. The mechanism probably involves their different effects on sleep architecture. Valerian increases time spent in slow-wave sleep, the deep restorative stage. Hops reduces nighttime awakenings, helping you stay asleep once you get there. Together, you fall asleep more easily, sleep more deeply, and wake up less often. Each herb addresses a different weak point in the sleep process. Or consider chamomile, lemon balm, and lavender. Chamomile works on GABA A receptors directly. Lemon balm inhibits GABA breakdown, while also modulating acetylcholine. Lavender works through olfactory pathways to activate the parasympathetic nervous system. 3 different entry points into the same goal nervous system downregulation. That's why sleepy time tea, which contains chamomile, spearmint, and other herbs, has been used by 40 million Americans since the 1970s. Not because any single ingredient is powerful, but because the combination creates a cumulative effect. The spearmint adds aromatic compounds that enhance the chamomile's GABA effects. The tilia flowers contribute flavonoids that support the other ingredients. Each herb doing something small, but together producing something noticeable. Medieval herbalists understood this intuitively. They created sleep sachets, small linen pouches stuffed with dried lavender, chamomile, and hops, and placed them under pillows. The scent compounds from all 3 plants would release slowly overnight, creating a sustained aromatherapeutic effect. Lavender's linalool, chamomile's apigenin volatiles, hops myrcene, all drifting into the air simultaneously, each activating different olfactory receptors, each telling your brain through different channels, it's safe to sleep now. Modern research has started quantifying these traditional combinations. A study by Dimfell in 2008 used electroencephalography, EEG, to measure brainwave patterns after people consumed herbal combinations. They specifically looked at valerian hops and passion flower together. Within 90 minutes, theta wave activity increased by 45%. Theta waves are the frequency your brain produces when you're drowsy, when you're in that transitional state between waking and sleeping. Increased theta activity means your brain is shifting into sleep mode more efficiently. The combination pushed participants toward that threshold faster and more reliably than single herbs did. But synergy isn't just about combining sedating herbs. You can also blend calming herbs with adaptogens. Ashwagandha plus magnolia bark, for instance. Ashwagandha works over weeks to normalize your stress response, rebuilding your capacity to handle pressure. Magnolia bark works within hours to reduce cortisol and calm anxious thoughts. Together, you get immediate relief and long-term resilience, the acute and the chronic addressed simultaneously. Or passion flower with California poppy. Passion flower modulates GABA and reduces that anxious mental looping. California poppy regulates dopamine, removing the restless sense that you should be doing something else. Anxiety plus restlessness are a common insomnia combination. Addressing both at once creates conditions for sleep that addressing either alone might not. There's also something to be said for ritual. When you make tea using multiple herbs, measuring chamomile, adding lemon balm, stirring in lavender, you're engaging in a process that itself signals to your brain we're entering the transition towards sleep. The act of preparation becomes part of the medicine. Your hands learn the routine. Your sense of smell anticipates the blend. Your body starts responding before the compounds even reach your bloodstream. Traditional Chinese medicine formulas almost never use single herbs. A typical TCM prescription might contain 8 to 15 different plants, each chosen not just for its primary action, but for how it supports or moderates the other ingredients. They call it Emperor Minister Assistant Envoy. The Emperor herb addresses the main problem. The ministers support the Emperor's action. The assistants prevent side effects or address secondary symptoms. The envoys guide everything to the right part of the body. Western herbalism is catching up to that framework. Modern formulas for sleep often include a primary calming herb, like valerian or passion flower, supporting herbs like chamomile or lemon balm that enhance GABA activity. Adaptogens like ashwagandha that address underlying stress, and sometimes nervines like skullcap or California poppy that settle restlessness. Each herb has a role, none of them are redundant. But here's the caution: more isn't always better. Adding too many herbs creates complexity without clarity. Your liver has to process all those compounds. Your receptors can get overwhelmed or confused by competing signals. 3 to 5 herbs is usually the sweet spot, enough to cover different mechanisms without burdening your system. And not every combination works for every person. Some people respond beautifully to valerian hops passion flower. Others find the blend too strong, almost sedating. Some people need the gentleness of chamomile, lemon balm, lavender. Others find it too mild, insufficient for chronic insomnia. There's trial and error involved, paying attention to how your body responds rather than assuming one formula is universal. The other thing about combinations, they teach you something about your own nervous system. If you try chamomile alone and it helps a little, then add lemon balm and it helps more. You're learning that your insomnia involves both GABA deficiency and acetylcholine dysregulation. If you try valerian alone and it helps, but adding hops makes it perfect, you're learning that your sleep problem involves both falling asleep and staying asleep. The combinations become diagnostic, not just therapeutic. There's a reason nature doesn't produce plants with single active compounds. Even pharmaceutical grade isolates pure caffeine, pure theobromine, pure whatever, don't work quite the same as consuming the whole plant. Coffee has hundreds of compounds beyond caffeine. Chocolate has dozens beyond theobromine. Those supporting compounds modulate effects, soften edges, provide balance. Herbal medicine honors that complexity instead of trying to reduce it. It accepts that sleep isn't one problem with one solution, but a constellation of factors. Stress hormones, neurotransmitters, circadian rhythms, emotional state, physical comfort, all interacting. And it uses plants that work on multiple factors, simultaneously supporting each other, like musicians in an orchestra. You don't need to understand the full biochemistry to benefit from synergy. You just need to be willing to listen to your body when it tells you something is working. When the combination of herbs makes sleep feel easier than any single herb did. When rest stops being something you fight for and starts being something you allow. There's a certain kind of knowledge that doesn't announce itself. It doesn't arrive with credentials or demand to be believed. It just exists quietly in the background of human history, waiting for the people who need it to find it. Herbal sleep remedies are like that. They've been here the whole time in monastery gardens and Native American medicine bundles and Ayurvedic texts and your grandmother's kitchen cabinet, not hidden, just patient. Science eventually catches up. Laboratories isolate compounds and measure receptor binding and publish papers that confirm what thousands of years of observation already knew. Linalool reduces cortisol. Apigenin modulates GABA. Valerianic acid extends calming signals. With anolides, normalize stress response. The mechanisms get named, quantified, explained in language that requires years of education to understand fully. But the plants don't care about the language. They worked before we could explain them. They'll work after we stop trying. A 2019 report from the World Health Organization noted something interesting. 70% of modern pharmaceutical sleep medications are derived from or inspired by plant compounds. 70%. The majority of what we consider cutting-edge medicine is just refined versions of what grew in soil first. We didn't invent these mechanisms, we borrowed them, we extracted them, we tried to improve on them with varying success. Sometimes the original is better, not always, not for everyone, but often enough that 40 million Americans buy herbal sleep aids every year. Often enough that traditional Chinese medicine and Ayurveda and European herbalism all converge independently on many of the same plants, valerian, chamomile, passion flower, because observation across cultures kept pointing to the same conclusions. That's the thing about plants. They don't market themselves. They don't have advertising budgets or patent protections. They just grow generation after generation, containing the same compounds, offering the same effects, available to anyone willing to learn how to use them. You don't need to become an herbalist. You don't need to memorize biochemical pathways or receptor subtypes. You just need to start somewhere. Chamomile if you want gentle, valerian if you need stronger, lavender if scent matters, ashwagandha if stress is the root issue, California poppy if restlessness keeps you wired, combinations if single herbs aren't sufficient. Start with one. Give it 2 weeks. Notice what changes and what doesn't. Adjust. Add something. Remove something. Your body will tell you what works if you pay attention to it, instead of expecting instant dramatic results that look like pharmaceutical advertising. Because herbal medicine isn't fast. It's not forceful. It doesn't override your systems. It supports them. It reminds your body how to do things it already knows how to do, but forgot under the weight of stress and screens and the constant demands of a world that doesn't value rest. Rest isn't productive. It doesn't contribute to GDP. It doesn't get you promoted or make you more attractive or solve your problems. It just makes you human in a way that sleep deprivation slowly erodes. And the plants that help with rest are doing something profoundly countercultural. They're saying, your body's need for sleep matters more than your to-do list. That used to be obvious. In every traditional culture, there were rhythms, seasons, times for work and times for rest. Darkness meant sleep because there was no alternative. But we've engineered ourselves into a situation where sleep is optional, rest is weakness, and exhaustion is a badge of honor. The plants don't participate in that narrative. They just keep growing. Keep producing the compounds that tell your nervous system it's okay to stop now. You've done enough. Morning will come, whether or not you spend tonight reviewing everything you did wrong today. Maybe that's why people are turning back to herbs. Not because modern medicine failed, it hasn't, not entirely, but because somewhere in the pursuit of faster, stronger, more effective, we lost sight of the fact that the body isn't a machine to be optimized. It's an organism that needs care, patience, gentleness. The kind of care that takes time. The kind that doesn't promise instant results, but offers something more sustainable. A garden doesn't bloom because you demand it. It blooms because conditions are right. Soil, water, sunlight, time. You can't force it. You can only create the environment where blooming becomes possible, and then wait. Sleep is like that too. You can't force it. You can only create the conditions: calm, nervous system, regulated stress hormones, quiet mind, dark room, chamomile, tea, cooling on the nightstand, and then let go of the outcome. The herbs help with the letting go. They chemically shift your baseline just enough that surrender feels possible instead of terrifying. They make rest feel like a reasonable thing to do instead of a luxury you haven't earned or a failure you're succumbing to. And maybe that's all we need sometimes. Not answers, not solutions, not the complete resolution of every problem that's keeping us awake. Just a small shift. Just enough room between you and your anxiety that you can breathe deeper. Just enough calm that closing your eyes doesn't feel like giving up. The garden is still growing, right now. Lavender is blooming somewhere. Chamomile is opening its flowers toward the sun. Valerian roots are pushing deeper into soil. The plants are doing what they've always done, generation after generation, storing compounds in petals and roots and bark, waiting patiently for the people who need them to notice. They're not magic. They're just chemistry that happens to work on human nervous systems because we evolved alongside these plants and ecosystems where their compounds were part of the background of existence. We're not separate from nature. We're made of the same elements operating on the same principles. The plants aren't strangers. They're relatives we forgot how to talk to. And they're still here, still willing to help, still offering their quiet remedies to anyone who asks. So, tonight, if sleep feels far away, maybe don't fight it. Maybe just hold something warm. Breathe in something that smells like a garden. Let the compounds do their work while you do yours, which is nothing, which is rest, which is remembering that your body knows how to sleep. It's done it before. It'll do it now. The night is listening. The plants are waiting. And you're allowed to be tired. You're allowed to close your eyes. You're allowed to let go. Sleep well, dream gently. Good night.